So now it's just blazing.
Well, they got that. It ain't gonna happen.
It was France, they will save those trees.
It isn't gonna happen.
Let's go.
You didn't have it in your office.
Because
No.
I have a huge one in my house.
It's up in there, it's in the ceiling.
It's been going from window to window and window.
Wasp is the thing, okay, the next one will be pigeons,
Very efficient.
and after that, we'll have rats.
No.
We've been through that cycle.
It's kind of like the
Kenny's off.
Can we get it out of the current?
Kenny's off today and tomorrow, but send him an email or text or I can,
Okay.
and, you
That
can
was
have the
going up.
best guys look for wasps.
Well, good morning and welcome to the Thursday, May 26, 2022, special board meeting at 10:30. So we're all here gathered. Is Director Murphy, will she be here? Is she here on Zoom?
She's on Zoom.
Okay, great. All right. Good morning, Director Murphy. We don't see you, but we know you're here. Okay. So how about we do the call to order then?
Okay, Director Balin,
Here?
Director Boatright,
Here.
Director Kearns,
Here.
Director Murphy,
Here.
Director Reagan.
Here.
Okay, all five are present.
Okay, thank you. So let's see, Director Kearns, would you like to lead us in the pledge of allegiance, please?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Well, we'd like to welcome the members of the public at this time for the public forum. We've taken the time to attend the meeting and provide comments on matters related to district business. Any member of the public may address the board related to any matter within the board's jurisdiction. This need not be related to any item on the agenda. However, the board cannot act on an item unless it was noticed on the agenda. Persons speaking during the public comment will be limited to 5 minutes, or depending on the number of persons wishing to speak, it may be reduced to allow all members of the public the opportunity to address the board. So at this time, is there any member of the public that's sitting here wish to address the board on items not on the agenda? Yes, go ahead, sir. Yes, and please, yes. And just remember, is this an item that's not on the agenda? Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And I realize you cannot take action, whatever. Can I have a heads up?
Sure.
Because as I'm speaking, I think most people think faster than somebody speaks. So he could be
Thank you.
looking at what I'm doing, talking about, and keep that.
And then could we have an extra one for Director Murphy? Okay, great. Thank you.
That's not that
Oh, great.
part of it.
Okay, thank you. Okay.
So, my name is David Schweitzer. I was a manager at PG&E for a few years. Back in the 80s, snow manager, retired from PG&E some time ago. And I knew water issues in Tacoma County and with TUD have been there always, I think. And so I know that as a manager, you don't really get involved normally in operations too much. But in the case of water in Tacoma County, it's just part of being in the job. And so I learned the system a little bit, and in some respects, it hasn't changed much. Water is still coming down from the mountains, being used in the county, and we still have controversy about the water supply and deliveries and things like that. And so I did attend your meeting a couple of weeks ago and heard some talking points, which are also on your webpage, and it sure differs from what I recall as when I was the manager here locally. And so I addressed that and put them into really 5 points that I put together and assembled that. The first thing I would want to suggest, and it's one of the main things, is that the statement that TUD has no water rights, to me is just erroneous. The purchase agreement back in 1983 clearly stated that the system would be intact been given to Tuolumne County, or at that time, Tuolumne County TUD now, and would operate essentially as it had when PG&E was providing water. Water rights were included in that purchase agreement. They were spelled out on page 2 of the agreement. Plus, really important is an attachment, attachment C, which specifically identifies 37.5 cubic feet per second delivered at 4 different points. Those were the points that PG&E had been used when it was a water supply company. The water rights are just the title of the attachment even says water rights transfer. Now, in addition to the contract, it reflects the operating system that was transferred, but it also, the water rights are identified and approved, submitted and approved by a number of state and federal agencies. If you read the FERC filings, they list that PG&E will provide a supply of water. A couple of them actually say water rights. So I think that suggesting that water rights were not transferred to Tuolumne County, TUD has no water right, is just a misstatement, because it is clear that the system has the water rights from PG&E. They do not have the pre-1913 water rights, and there's probably some good reasons why that took place. First of all, one, of course, is that not all of the PG&E water rights, the pre-13 rights, are were needed in Tuolumne County. So to split those water rights up could have been an open door for a lot of things bad things to happen for the supply within the county. If you open up a FERC application, there will be new demands placed. Every time it happens, there's always new demands, and it ends up with less water being made available. Just bottom line, it just happens that way. So that's the first statement, and I've got to rush through this because I know time is of essence. But the water rights are clearly identified, not only in the agreement, but in the filings that PG&E has made with various state agencies. What is a water right? Very simple. A statement by the Water Resource Control Board, the controlling board in California. A water right is a legal entitlement authorizing water to be delivered from a specific source to put to the beneficial non-wasteful use. I don't think anybody could question that water coming down is part of a water right. Second statement that I have a little concern about is that TUD does not control the water. Each week, TUD calls PG&E's hydro department and tells them how much to put in the main canal, the water supply for the county. That's done on a weekly basis. It can be done on a daily basis, but usually it's a weekly basis. So to suggest that TUD is not controlling the water that's available, I don't understand how that takes place. Now, does TUD control how much water goes into Pinecrest Lake? No. I think the only one that controls that is God. I don't think anybody can control how much water we receive and don't receive in Pinecrest, which then is, of course, used at.
I'm going to have to limit your time respectfully.
Okay.
I'm going to have to limit your time respectfully. So give us 1 more minute.
Okay. May I skip the last item?
You bet.
Because it is a big item. PG&E might sell the system to another. The contract is very specific, again, the purchase agreement contract, that you cannot deviate from the contract. You can't sell the contract unless both parties agree to it. So PG&E, if TUD does not agree to it, PG&E is not going to be given the chance to sell that contract. It would be a legal nightmare to even attempt to do that. It would be a customer disaster to do it. And quite frankly, there are probably a lot of public agencies that would be really concerned about the disposition of all the water rights that PG&E has and the obligation that TUD has. So I'm not really concerned about some other entity coming in and taking it, especially knowing that roughly a third of the water is committed for domestic purposes. So if that's time.
That's great, yeah, and I think we will be looking at this.
Well, please do, and again, if you don't have the full 1983 contract, I'll be happy to provide it. I have it now in a digital format, and you can go through it. And there's a lot of stuff in it, but I just think that if you're going to talk to the public, you want to be transparent. And the issues I've listed are the 5 main issues, suggest to me that you're not being totally transparent with that.
Well, thank you, sir, and we will take this up. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah. Any other member of the audience here wishing to speak? Corey, anyone on the virtual audience?
Not that is indicating at the moment, no.
Okay, all right. So, all right. Then that will close our public forum and we will move to regular business. So Melissa, would you please read the item for regular business?
Okay, item number 1, introduction and discussion of the fiscal year 2023 capital improvement plan.
Thank you.
Good morning, President Baylor, directors, audience. So this is that time of year, we do this annually, right about now. Just to give you a little bit of background, I'm sure you know that we spend many, many months in the development of the fiscal year next fiscal year, in this case 23, both the capital improvement plan, an update to the 5-year plan, to really solidify the fiscal year 23 plan, CIP plan, and then at the same time, Steve and all of his departments are working on this, on the capital, on the budget for the next fiscal year. So this has been many months in the development. I've had a chance to review it several times, so I'm comfortable with where it is. So today we're just giving it to you as an introduction, and we'll have another meeting in June to formally adopt both of these items. Anyway, Eric's going to go first with the CIP.
Good morning. As Don said, this is an introduction. It's intended to just give the board a status update on our CIP planning progress. We're going to focus on fiscal year 23, although our capital improvement plan is a 5-year document that's updated annually. So our real focus is to get our cost estimates and our project descriptions down to a significant level of detail for the next year, but we will constantly be refining the document so that we're rolling ahead five years at a time. Joined this morning by Associate Engineer Gadiel DiMattei. He's here to answer any technical questions the board may have related to the cost estimates. We're not going to go through in ad nauseum all the projects on the list. We've cherry-picked out a few of the larger dollar value projects and the ones that we think are strategically important to the district, just to highlight. But we're also happy to talk in greater detail if you desire about other projects on the list. Might be helpful to start out. I think the board has seen this slide before on previous presentations. Definition of capital improvement plan. It's also a CIP is the acronym. Sometimes they call it a capital improvement program. It's synonymous. According to Wikipedia, which I thought this was a pretty good definition, it's a short range plan, usually 4 to 10 years, 5 years in our case, which identifies capital projects and equipment purchases, provides a planning schedule, and identifies options for financing the plan. We don't go into a whole lot of detail on options for financing the plan. Steve could elaborate on that, but it's generally largely rates, grants, and alike. Capital projects are greater than 50,000 except for vehicles and some equipment, which Steve would capitalize. And as Don referenced, we do this presentation in conjunction with the budgeting process because your board essentially, by adopting the budget, you're giving staff the ability to implement the CIP. A CIP is just a document. If it doesn't have a budget that funds the CIP, then it really doesn't have a whole lot of value. Our CIP is generally about $7 million a year. Just rough bookends here, about 5 million on water and 2 million on sewer. And that represents somewhere 25 to 30% of the operating budget. The CIP really is the last thing that gets funded in the budgeting process. We have all of our obligations for staff and labor and operating expenses, reserves, and all these other components. It's the portion that's left over that we can allocate to capital improvements. Funding sources for the CIP, like we just discussed, rates, capacity fees. I included public-private partnerships. In parentheses, you can say cost sharing, grants, loans, and property taxes. They aren't in any specific order. Grants have historically been significant for us. They don't show up in the budget or in the cost estimating numbers because those are essentially pass-through items. We may actually do another couple $1 million in improvements over the $7 million a year just because we get a grant. We don't budget for grants, but when they do come through, we're passing those costs, taking the proceeds and passing it over to the contractors or the equipment and materials that we purchase. This year, we've given you a snapshot of this year's summary and the 5-year. We're going to focus on this year, but there you see it, 7 million. We're at 5.2 in water and 1.8 in sewer proposed for next year. I should say that we don't always finish all of our CIP. And so we budget 7 million, we may budget 8 million. The reality is that with right-of-way acquisition, environmental, permitting, and many other aspects, we see delays and we aren't always able to finish all of our projects. So the idea is let's broaden our view here and try to include as many projects as we possibly could, raise the bar high, and then when the dust settles at the end of the year, we'll know which ones really we're able to move forward and proceed. There's just so many unknowns right now with material lead times and other things that we're hopeful to finish it, but we may not. What we caution against is narrowing our field of vision to just include a few projects that we are dead certain we can finish. And then if something happens and we don't finish those, we haven't worked on any of the other projects. So we're constantly trying to move everything a little forward as we go. The other thing of note is construction doesn't typically follow our fiscal year. Fiscal year, June 30th, it starts again July 1st. That's right in the middle of construction season. So very few construction projects are going to finish all in one fiscal year. We try to estimate how much we'll finish this fiscal year, and then we carry over. We don't really carry over. We budget for what we think the remaining costs will be in the following fiscal year. The process for us to even get to this point, I glossed over, but I want to really point out that it's an iterative, collaborative process with operations and finance. It starts with Eric asking his superintendents for what are the needs out there. They know, the people in the field know really where the infrastructure needs are. They come back with their preliminary list. We ask a few questions, try to refine what's the problem, and then what's the need, and what's the scope of the project. Sometimes it's like, we got this problem, well, what's the solution? And as we go through that iterative process, we meet with the superintendents individually, sometimes we meet as a group. We then get to a level of clarity that allows Gadiel to provide a cost estimate. Gadiel spent a lot of time, as Don said, months of work up to this point. I don't recall how many projects Gadiel estimated, but many more than are reflected on the CIP because they vastly exceed our finances. But Gadiel looked at a 3% annual inflation rate. He looked at things like, are we building it in-house or are we going to outsource this? Are we going to design it in-house or outsource that? Because there's a big cost difference. Our labor is already a fixed cost. So if we, to the extent that we can do design in-house and construction in-house, that means that our cash expense is really going to relate to equipment and materials. It's much less. We try to estimate that. We also look at some big cost drivers lately have been traffic control, believe it or not, as we get into the roads where you may be paying $2,000 a day for traffic control. And then surface restoration. The county adopted a new dig once policy that, as the board will see out of Phoenix Lake Road, our crews are finishing up a main line there. We're gonna have to overlay an entire lane, which is an expense that we historically haven't realized. But Gadiel spent a lot of time to really get those cost estimates down. Their budget level only, because we haven't always done design. And then the other note at the bottom of this slide is these costs do not include grant revenue, and the sewer at 1.8 million does not include, any of the loan costs and other things associated with the Sonora wastewater treatment plant. We want to give the board a perspective on how it's all sliced up. In 2023, we have a lot of our water CIP going to distribution, just so it worked out that way, as opposed to supply and treatment. A lot of that is we've got some big projects related to the Ridgewood intertide, that pipeline coming down. We have on the treatment side, the Sonora water treatment plant improvements, and then very little work on the raw water system was programmed for next year. That, however, changes, and you can see the pie gets a little larger for supply and gets quite a bit larger for treatment in the 5-year, and that's because we anticipate finishing all those improvements to the Sonora water treatment plant over the next 5 years. And so distribution historically is usually in that 50 to half to 2/3 range, and that's what's reflected in the 5-year here. On the sewer side, next year, the treatment is 37%. That reflects some work that we plan to do at the Twain Harte wastewater treatment plant. And then in collection is usually a larger piece of the pie, and you see that reflected in the 5-year. So looking at just 1 year is kind of myopic. It doesn't give you the full picture over 5 years, partly, as I said, because we don't complete one project necessarily cleanly in 1 year. And then we're just going to highlight a few of the key projects that we see here. In the next fiscal year, we've programmed some money for general warehouse expansion. If you've seen the yard, it's gotten quite crowded. We've got pipes stacked up in the sunlight, which you never really want to have pipes stored outside for very long, uncovered. We have lift station sumps out there. We've got things in crates, and a lot of this should be under covered warehouse space. This is allocated, Steve could talk more to this, as 70% water and 30% sewer. So this is the total cost. 70% would go into the water CIP and 30% to wastewater. The Ridgewood pipeline, phase 1 and 2, technically you could call phase 1 the one that our crews are currently constructing, but there are 2 other segments of Phoenix Lake Road and then up Ridgewood Drive. We anticipate receiving some grant assistance, although the grant won't cover the full cost, so we budgeted or proposing the balance here of $1.6 million. We are close to putting that project out to bid and hope to start this fall with the construction and finish up next year. So that may actually be completed this fiscal year.
Eric, do you want us to hold our questions till the end?
Feel free to ask questions whenever, I should say.
Quick question, and for this one, did we qualify for consolidation incentive?
Great question. Yes, we did. And so we had a conversation with the state about 3 weeks ago on this. Originally, our idea was to take the consolidation incentive from the Curtis Creek Elementary School project, which is, we believe, about $1.3 million, and apply it to this project. And so that's why you see the grant funding being applied here. And that's still the case. However, the state also said, this could be considered part of your Sierra Pines project, and your Sierra Pines project is closer along in the application process to getting grant funding. Why don't you roll it into that and then use your incentive dollars on another project? Still up in the air, but the answer to your question is yes, we could apply the incentive funds to this project.
So that they could give us money because we are consolidating.
They won't give us money specifically for this. Let me try to answer your question. This is another incentive consolidation project that, yes, could qualify for an incentive. However, if we roll it into the Sierra Pines and the state gives us a big chunk of money, it's $46 million project, then they've indicated to us that they may not be able to extend to us the consolidation incentive on top of that large funding. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So we're kind of negotiating with them right now.
Okay.
We do have Director Murphy with her hand up for a question.
Go ahead.
And it's just to back up a slide to the wastewater. There we go. Nope. Sewer CIP. Great. Thank you. On that, did I read in the first slide that the Sonora plant that we're working on right now is not part of, it's not part of the dollars we're talking about within the sewer CIP. Is that correct?
That's correct. We've fulfilled our cash obligation in this fiscal year. Next fiscal year, we'll be paying, Steve, can you elaborate on like the debt service or at least the interim financing expenses? Those are paid out of O&M, right?
Yeah, Steve Sheffield, Finance Director, and good question, Director Murphy. Essentially with specifically the regional wastewater plant, that was a combination of our match, an actual low interest rate, 40-year loan from USDA, and then a grant as well. So we're spending our match first, and we're going to exceed that before the end of the year is expected. And so when we do these, the sewer budget for next year, we are not including the grant funds or the loan funds. We already have on there. So
how does we're making loan payments along the way, right? It's not just a big balloon at the end, correct? How does that figure in?
yeah, that figures in. You'll see it on the operation and maintenance underneath our debt service.
And the sewer side and the water side are have separate debt service column, something?
Almost all the loans are specifically water or sewer. We did have a loan, I think we paid it off now for like this building here, and that gets split. But yes, they're separately identified within the funds.
Okay, very good. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
The next project we thought was worthwhile to share with the board is one that the board's already very aware of and has taken a tour out at the Sonora Water Treatment Plant. And it's the continued efforts to modernize this. We've made great strides in the last year related to the controls and the electrical. Gadiel's been working with operations on constructing a new chemical storage building that should be starting construction here fairly soon. But we still will have remaining expenses. We estimate around $485,000 for next year. And then the 5-year, the big ticket item is over 5 years, $8.1 million. We really need, we prioritize that very high based on input from the board, but just the knowledge that, you know, the sedimentation basin, we've cleaned it out and we've done some improvements to the baffle walls, but there's a lot of work left to be done. Backwash tank, and we've given the board previous presentations about this, but that's a big project and will require a long-term sustained effort to complete it in 5 years.
Eric, the total 5-year cost for the Sonora water treatment plant? Is there not a better way to put money into the new Sonora water treatment plant versus continuing to put money into the old, which is going to be a stranded or abandoned asset?
I think the answer is probably there are aspects of that project. One that we've spoken about, and that is we've purchased land off-site for the eventual new Sonora water treatment plant. Could we build some of the pre-treatment facilities there and not focus our efforts on the current site? One of the beauties of this being a 5-year document, and some of these big expenses are like 3 years out, 4 years out, and I'm looking at Gadiel, I can't remember where the actual set basin and all that work was, is that we have some time to work through those details. That it's a budget level cost estimate, it includes inflation, but if we go off-site and decide that's the way to go, we'll have an opportunity this time next year to present a new cost estimate as we go. So jury's still out and we will be looking at that.
You know, we need to decide before 2027.
Just, you know, like I said, looking at a 5-year CIP, that seems like, you know, that money being put towards a new water treatment plant on the site that we've already purchased is a much bigger investment right there.
Yeah, I agree. It's painful to invest in that site. But the cost to build a new treatment facility, entirely new, is probably in the neighborhood of $40 million. And the question is, can we phase it and make those investments off-site in a cost-effective way within our budget, so that we don't have to do it twice? We would like to do that. We'll be looking at that.
Is there any, you know, maybe a sideline question, is there the availability of grant, you know, because we're improving and bringing up to a new standard, the grant funds available that we can be persuaded to invest in a new property, and like you said, do a portion of the treatment off-site, bring it to the existing.
I think there are. We've been really focusing on Sierra Pines, and the game plan, or we should say the recipe that we're following for Sierra Pines, which is to get a lot of the preliminary design environmental done, and then to do outreach like crazy with local and state and federal representatives for support, and then we had a meeting and a tour yesterday, is the same sort of game plan I think we could apply to this to get grant funding. We just haven't pivoted over to that with the bandwidth that we have. We've been focusing on Sierra Pines because if we can get Sierra Pines, what it does is it allows us to consolidate a bunch of other facilities that are represented in our CIP and free up funds to then allocate towards the new Sonora plan. There are funding opportunities out there, I'm sure.
Thank you.
And I'll just tag on my 2 cents worth. You know, you all are the operational people. I'm the finance guy, but I remember years ago, Don Perkins, when he was operations director, telling me, I'm concerned Sonora's not gonna make it. And so here you are, you put money into something, because we have to have it every day, we're using that plant. Every day we're delivering. And so if you just say, well, I'm gonna build a new one, and it takes us 6 or 7 or 8 years to build a new one, what happens in that time period? So from what I've heard then, we've actively been looking at what can we do now to make it better, to keep it going, to get to that point. I think, you know, from my perspective, they've done an outstanding job, and that there's been some significant improvements at Sonora Water Treatment Plant without having to put in 8 million, 10 million, whatever. Nobody wants to strand assets. I know that's the case, but we still have to supply people with what we got, and that's what we do really well. We've done a lot of times in these big projects. Hopefully we can do it and get funding, and we're encouraged about that. But I think we gotta just take it a step at a time. Such infrastructure needs, the cost of these things, so.
Getting down here, I'm not sure how many more slides, not too many more, but Zone 4 tank, the board authorized purchasing some land in the Miwok area to basically replace the existing, what we call white fur tank, and then also, the Zone 3 tank failure late last year. We'd like to consolidate our storage up on this new site, and the land transfer is complete. We have title to the land. We're starting the CEQA environmental process, and we're in design. We hope to be able to get a tank constructed this fiscal year for that project, and we'll be coming to the board at a future date with more information.
Question here. So the Zone 3 tank, will that be rebuilt or it would just be done away with?
Done away with and consolidated or replaced with a larger tank at a higher elevation at the Zone 4 site. Willow Springs lift station, we made great strides over the last 5 years. I've lost count of how many sewer lift stations our crews have rehabilitated, constructed new. And this Willow Springs lift station is, Director Boatright would know, either 1 or 2 in terms of volume. It's certainly in the top 3, and it's an important, very important lift station in a very inconvenient location right now. We're working with an adjoining property in order to acquire some additional land, and our hope is at least in fiscal year 23 to be done with that process and possibly to be ordering some of the sumps. It takes a long time to get those pieces of equipment, material in here. The total cost is $626,000. Of course, that seems very high, but we would be building essentially a completely new lift station on an adjoining site, demolishing this particular facility, turning it into a parking area. And I should say that number also reflects a significant inflation. I remember when we used to be able to build lift stations for like $300, about half the price. Twain Harte wastewater treatment plant, again, a multi-year effort here. The current facility that we're building down in Sonora will be able to handle the load from Twain Harte. Really, our concern is the interceptor pipeline and preserving that. And so we envision some screening, rip removal, converting the existing ponds to aerated basins. There's some other improvements there, and we're in design of that right now. Not totally certain if we'll be able to start in early 2023, but we'll be able to keep the board updated on that project. And it is about $1 million there. We anticipate being able to do some of the work with our crews to maybe bring that cost down. I can stop sharing unless anyone would like me to go back to any of the slides.
In looking at the amount of your budget from CIP, 7 million out of 23 million total budget for TUD, give or take. In your perspective, when you compare what you have to work with now with before we went into a staged rate increase over the last, I just want to say decade because it feels like a decade, even though I know it's not, when we first approved it to we gave our last implementation of it. How much did you typically have to work with for a CIP budget before the 7 million?
I'll try, and I think everyone, I don't know.
Yeah, in 2015, it was 0, under that year. That's right. And I had to ask for $5,000 budget amendment to buy a power washer. So that was a troubling year, but that's not really answering your question. And I don't know if I can really recall back before that because I had just become a manager, but the new rates, if I've got this right, on the water side, the new rates began in 2015. It was intended to add $5 million for CIP to the water fund. So for 5 years, we spent an additional $25 million on the capital improvement plan. So I'm not sure if that answers your question or not, but it was supposed to boost it by $5 million.
So
Sound
in
about
your
right?
opinion, with that the cumulative rate increase has helped us do things not just with our force account, but also because that's just, linear projects, right? With more money, we can do a combination of force account and contractors. So I guess what I'm asking is, do you feel with that rate increase that we are getting ahead of the deferred maintenance overall, or we just keep it up?
We all might have different answers. I feel like the answer is yes. We have been able to begin to start gaining ground on our deferred maintenance. We have a long way to go, and inflation is beginning to chip away at our ability to keep up. As Eric pointed out on that Willow Springs lift station, we were doing those for $285,000 to $350,000 just a few years ago, and now it's nearly $600,000. So yes, and especially as of late, right? We've really sort of retooled how we operate with on-call construction, on-call environmental, on-call engineering, in-house construction, and then our traditional design build. We really retooled, and now we're able to really move as quick as we possibly can. So I hope that was helpful.
Yeah, it does. You're speaking about, and it's an investment that's going to pay off further than just this rate. Thank you. Director Raymond.
So I had a couple of questions. One is capacity fees. Now that would be like what is collected for new construction and so on. So that would go to the water projects, and it can be spent on new and replacement, right?
Yeah, we'll be covering that in a little more detail with the O&M budget, but essentially you're correct. But the capacity fees are very small compared to the CIP cost.
Oh, yeah, and I understand, but at least it's a component and it helps. My other thing is, I'm having an old man moment here. I can't think of the term I want, but the reason why when we get an outside contractor to do a project, the reason why it's more costly is there's going to be profit involved in it because that's what they're in business for, is to make a couple bucks. But is that also because the workers doing the job have to be paid?
Prevailing wage.
There you go. Thank you. I couldn't remember that. So that's why it runs its way up.
That's probably the biggest reason.
Actually.
And for me, I just can't help myself, right? Also, time is money, right? Everybody understands that, right? If we could have done all of these projects 10 years ago, how many millions of dollars would we save? So by going traditional design build, which we did forever around here, right? It's a long process. When we do that in-house, it's a fraction of the time, right? The time somebody thinks about it, gives it to Eric. Eric comes to Eric and Gabrielle. They do a couple of things on some paper. I don't mean to insult you, but boom, it's out there. It's incredible. Versus traditional design build. You can see how long it's taking, nobody's fault, how long it's taking that work to be done on standard road.
Well, I think too that there's no change orders when it's done in-house. And if they run into an issue or a better way to do it, it just gets done.
Right.
If it's being done by an outside contractor, guess what? We get to go back to the piggy bank and pull some more out.
And inspection too. We're probably gonna pay $40,000 on inspection just for that pipeline down Standard Road. I'm pointing over there, Standard Road. And that's just not a cost that we would have if our crews built that. Fortunately, that's a grant funded project, so the grant will pay for the inspector. But there's just so many advantages to building with our own crews. Cost savings and time are just too low.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you. Any further comments?
I have a question. When will we see a line-by-line item for the CIP? As far as the full CIP that will be approved?
So we have that information now, and I believe, it will be coming to the board with sufficient time for your review prior to the next board meeting when we would be asking for you guys to consider adopting the budget. It's really kind of a supplement to the budget. Is that correct, Steve?
Yeah, and typically for most agencies, the way this is approached is like Eric said, what's our total in here? There's two ways to look at. One, you could have, we, at one time, this organization had CIP anything over $500. If you remember, David. And so we could provide you a list with several thousand items that are over $500, and the board's gonna go through every one of those items on the list. What I think we're really asking the board to do is, we've done our due diligence. They've gathered the needs. We don't have enough money to satisfy all the needs. We can give you a budget with $200-300 million. Well, that's not realistic. And it's not realistic to not do anything in CIP. We had a zero budget one time, knee-jerk reaction. Well, we all know if we don't fix it today, it'll cost more next year, or it'll be twice as much because something else will break. So we're really looking at is, what's the total we want to do on CIP? They've allocated it, they've prioritized them, they've set out a timing structure. So again, typically June 14th, we'll come back with a detailed budget report. It'll spell out everything on the O&M side. We usually attach a CIP by water, sewer, and the other ones in there. But again, I kind of look at it as the role and objective here is not whether we buy 6 trucks, but whether or not we're comfortable with this $5 million that we have in here. And then as we know, as soon as we start the next year, we're going to try and leverage grant opportunities. We're going to have timing issues. We're going to have a permit here. We're going to have a broken pipe there that we need to address. So you will get it. It'll be part of the board packet for the June 14th meeting.
Okay. And then question brought back up for the board. Hey, as we look at CIP to approve a budget, and if we just approve a budget allotment, are we actually doing our board's due diligence to look at individual items? There are different projects and stuff and items in the CIP budget that guide and direct the direction of TUD, which is a director's job versus staff's job. So the question is, at the board level, are we involved in basically redlining items in a budget, going as a board voting towards single items?
Yes, Director Raymond.
Yeah, I don't really agree with that. We're not out in the field. We don't know what's going on for the most part. Some of us try and get out and take a look at the infrastructure and what's going on. But I don't think that's a board job. I think that is the operations manager and the employees and, well, I should say staff, because they're the ones that work with it day in and day out. And I would really feel uncomfortable about this board. Tell them, well, you're gonna do this, you're gonna do that, and you're gonna do this, but you're not gonna do that. And I just don't think that's our job.
Mr. Raymond, I partially agree with you. When it comes to replacement items, rebuild of a Willow Springs sewer pump station. It has reached its age, deteriorating, going to cost a lot to maintain and upkeep the standard of what it's supposed to do. And that is certainly, just a run of the mill. That's part of deferred maintenance. And we go through and approve a budget to replace it. Where my direction is going there is looking at specific project items that take the district into different directions or expanding certain areas of the system.
But the only thing is that those projects would not be included in this CIP if they weren't necessary right now. I mean, this is something that is important to get done. It's just money in order to get it done.
Okay, I do have one specific project, just
Yeah.
one more minute, please.
Well, let me answer.
I have one specific project that comes to my mind. And in my mind, from experience and former operation of the system, in my mind, it actually will break the system. So what I would like to know now is, do I have the ability to bring it up for debate at an appropriate point in time to say, are we going to move forward with what is a new expanding project, or it just swept into the CIP?
Personally, I'm gonna back into that. I don't know if I can answer that, but I mean, in my opinion, it's like, if you feel that there's something that could not be a proven thing, by all means, that is our role. But also, in my opinion, what gives direction to these folks, so that it's not just, not a runaway train, but a one foot in front of the other kind of thing, is that we as a board say things like, in a strategic plan, we want, zero energy. We want, from now on, we want charge stations. I mean, we are direct, that's for staff to decide, but we as a board in a strategic plan say it is important to this board to be as self-sufficient and as future-oriented and responsible, anticipating what's coming down, and design those features in, that the board, that's important to this board, to look at the social, environmental, and economic criteria for anything. And then that helps the staff make decisions so that we're not hovercrafts and going, whoa, is this in the best interest of the direction of the board? So I think we provide broad direction, but certainly if there's something that you feel is not in the best interest of TUD financially, I think it's important to speak out.
I don't think it's so much financially, it's a direction and a concern. But like I said, the line item for the CIP budget has not been presented as yet. So as a board member, I have no specific, this is a direction, or these are the items that we are working on, to go off of. I don't feel I've gotten a complete picture of the CIP budget as yet.
And where the room for discussion is. Like, will it be kind of a slam dunk at that time, or will we have an opportunity as a board to have mulled over those and have serious questions about those line items?
Correct. And, I totally agree with you with the way the strategic plans is developed, with the board to move TUD forward. We just want to make sure that there's total transparency of where that plan was designed to take us and how that, peels down into our different budget items.
Yeah, the right direction.
Right, thank you very much. Like I said, I just wanted to bring that portion up.
Yeah.
A couple things. I guess we sort of glossed over this, but we've talked about our strategic plan ad nauseum for a while now. I can assure you without any doubt that everything on what you've seen today and in on every one of those line items is according to our strategic plan, precisely, right? Precisely. That strategic plan is the guiding document for why we come to work every day. So it's in there. It is what you've told us to do. This board and previous boards is what. But I'm really curious, which project are you referring to that you think is leading us to?
Don't want to bring into, at this point in time, I don't want to bring up another debate or another,
all due respect, I think a lot of this could be offline. All due respect, I can't leave this, this is a public forum. There are lots of people listening to this. I really would like to know what project we're talking about.
I would like to see a line item CIP.
That's my answer.
So,
Now, historically, again, that line item CIP is provided at the next meeting. Today is intended to be a discussion, talking about what's going in here. But again, it's not intended to be operational for the board, you know? And if that's where you need or want to go, then we'd like to hear your feedback.
No,
So I'm
just
concerned
as
with the comment you made.
Well, Mr. Sheffield, just as I agreed with Mr. Reagan, it's not an operational detail item. It's for new and expanding projects in the district. That's where, you know, my concern would lie. And
Now, if we're talking new and expanding, one thing Eric didn't mention in here that probably should be is this CIP and the one that you're gonna see does not include anything related to the PG&E acquisition.
has nothing to do with PG&E.
So then I'm confused what new directions and things we're doing. I don't see it on my side.
My concerns may not even be, brought to fruition based on the fact that I haven't seen a, CIP line item. So if I am approving a $7 million CIP.
But we're not approving anything.
Well,
That's what I said. It's gonna be
I
provided
realize that,
before
Mr.
you.
Sheffield, that we're not approving that. My questions lie in the board's policy, procedures, and authority as a controlled CIP, which is guided by.
how about, okay, so the line item, the line items that are attached to this $7 million budget, that all add up to 7 million, give or take grants and all of the fluidity, excuse me. We will be getting that, and then the board will have a week or two to take a look at that before we pass the budget. Excuse me, I'm gonna have to go get some water. Okay, David, did that give you enough time to take a look at that?
It'll be fun. Even with the normal agenda for the, board pack.
Yeah, cause like this is, we'll be all together at the next meeting also. Oh no, plastic. Oh no, I get a drink under the table, I don't want anybody to see this. Thank you, Daniel.
There's just one other thing to
Yeah.
incorporate into this. We are really only talking about fiscal year 23. So we can provide the board the 5-year CIP list. If you take issue with projects that are included that you wouldn't want to have included that are out past fiscal year 23, I just would hate to hold up the budget for next year on some project that may be 4 years down the road. Because we do, want to have our budget adopted in a timely fashion. That seems like a pretty critical aspect of operations in the district. So, but we do have a list and we can share it.
Well, on the other hand, it could bring up a very important discussion for the board on policy needs, let's say, on what we consider as a criteria for new capacity enhancements. And so it could be, if we don't have a place to discuss where this should be, right now, Director Boatwright's tagging it to the line item, so we can begin to get our head around that. But it could be something that's extremely important to then hold a policy meeting on for additional direction, for clarification. Even though it might be consistent with our strategic plan, it might be something of concern that we need to, the board needs to clarify for staff. Is that a little bit closer to?
I believe I agree with most all of that. Okay, as far as it's a way that the strategic plan is interpreted and staff is trying to reach at the time of the strategic plan, that adopted actually specifically answering, that item on the strategic plan. I had the word a moment ago, and it just kind of went right out the window.
I think that's
The
really,
objective of the strategic plan.
okay, so that we could revisit that to see if we need a course correction there. Okay. All right. Good, thank you. Don't hesitate to bring stuff up like that, all of us, okay? Okay. Let's see.
Nothing further. Nothing further to present.
Okay.
Thanks for your.
So this is just our overview of the 7 million CIP, and now we'll go into some of the other Steve's budget for the total
I don't know
budget. I'm
if we
sure we'll
want
have
to
more
ask
questions.
any members of the public on CIP before we go.
Sure, is there any further questions from the board before I open it up to the public?
Director Murphy has a question.
Okay, go ahead, please.
Yeah, it goes back a little ways. And that was talking about the standard road, the difference between doing as an in-house project versus a contractor. Could you just speak to why we made the decision to go with a contractor on that?
This is going to be easy. Grant funded, we can pay for the full cost, use outside labor because the cost is completely covered. It gives our staff, frees them up to engage in more productive endeavors that are more cost effective.
And if we were with the grant funding, is it specified that we needed to go with a contractor, or was that an in-house decision to do that?
They have, some grant programs do not allow force account labor, force account meaning using our own crews. This one left it open and we made an internal decision to use an outside contractor.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you. Okay, any member of the public wish to comment? In our audience first, and then we'll go virtual. Okay, see no hands raised. Corey?
Not the moment, no.
Okay. All righty, so that's information and discussion, and we'll move to the second item of regular business. Melissa, will you please read that item?
Okay, item number 2, introduction and discussion of the fiscal year 2023 operating budget.
Great, I got started this morning, so we should be okay here. All right. So we've covered a lot of these kind of discussion items or to put in perspective, but again, today's a discussion. We spent a lot of time and effort at all levels of the organization in putting together the most realistic, most well-done budget on a line-by-line item, including some of these other unknowns like inflation and cost of fuel and who knows that we possibly can at this time. And so that's what we're bringing to the board. Again, not asking for any approval budget. And what happens from here is that, early on, we start with our calendar each year. So back in February 22nd, we came to the board with a mid-year review showing the first 6 months, reporting on that. April 4th, we began budgeting with the individual department heads to get their input. I very much encourage and request that they have a vested interest. It's not just Steve gave them this budget and here it is. And honestly, I couldn't develop it without them. They're getting better and better at it as we go. They're all involved, every department, every level. So then back on April 29th, the budgets all came back to our general manager, including the CIP that we talked about here. We reviewed those at the management team level as well as with our operations director specifically. And then on May 6th, Dawn and I got together and basically finalized, and when I say finalized, I'm just saying that's what we're presenting right now to the board. So today's the budget workshop. Now, if you'll notice in here, we historically always include an extra board meeting if needed. And that's for specifically some of the questions that came up here is that if we show you something right here and you don't agree with it or you want more information or whatever, I mean, obviously, that's the board's responsibilities and everything else to do that. But being that we're a fiscal year organization, you know, our year ends June 30th. So ideally, we absolutely want to have a budget in place before July 1st. You know, you hear it all the time, the state's famous for not having an adopted budget. We go into the new year, they can't spend, can't do this. Well, that's not really the same for us. But just good general business practices is you always have a budget in place, you're always reviewing it. So the goal's before July 1st. And so for us, we have 2 meetings scheduled in June, June 14th and then June 28th would be on there. Historically, we've had this meeting here, we've had another meeting if need be, and then June 14th, you know, is typically the first meeting in June when we do adopt the budget. Now, in this case, we do have new board members who, you know, may not be familiar with the process from last year or, you know, their role and responsibilities here. So we don't really have that extra meeting, but again, if it's significant enough and the board requires extra time, I'm not ever gonna force anybody or kind of strong arm you to adopt it, but we would ask to adopt it on June 14th. But if that's not, we could have another meeting on June 14th to discuss this. We could have another special workshop if that would assist or whatever. But by all means, the goal is to get it adopted by our June 28th meeting. So we start the new year. So today's meeting, the main topics we're going to cover, and again, this is just in generalities, but I want the board to hear what we go through to come up with the budget for revenues, talk about labor, because that's obviously our biggest component, talk about the other operations and maintenance, the non-labor, and then we're going to provide a recap of it, and then just look at what are some potential alternatives. So first and foremost on revenues, I've separated it between water revenues and sewer revenues. And revenues include service charges, property taxes, debt service recovery, facilities capital charges, and other income. The district is projected $17 million in annual water revenue and $7.4 million in annual sewer revenue for fiscal year 23, for a combined total revenue of $24.6 million. Our approach to revenue budgeting is to look at historical billing and consumption as well as projecting current year. I think it's important to note that the last rate increase was January 1st, 2020. Also, it should be noted that this projected budget at this time does not include any rate increase. So obviously, we announced our intent. We're going to be mailing a notice to our customers a rate increase. So until that's approved and adopted, we can't really include that. So we haven't. So what does that mean? If the rate increase passes and approved and everything else, we will come back to you to amend the budget to include the additional revenue and additional costs. So just to show you more in kind of a chart form in here, I think Barbara likes pie charts, so I always try to include one. Revenues total $24.6 million. Total combined revenues, I just mentioned. The service charges represent 92% or 22.8. Service charges are fees collected to recover the cost of providing water and wastewater services. And I think that's important to know that as an enterprise fund, as a governmental agency operating under the County Water Agency Act, we are supposed to charge sufficient revenues to cover operation and maintenance, capital improvements, CIP, debt service, as well as provide a reserve. And so the real struggle is you say, well, we can't afford CIP, we're not going to have any in it, or we need 200 million in it. That has to tie into what we charge our rates to our customers. And we need to look to the community, look to most of our customers are both water and sewer, so there's an affordability factor and those other ones. Another important thing to note for per state law is that revenue shall not be used for any purpose other than that for which the fee or charge was imposed. So that's where we get into tracking water versus sewer. On the service charges that I showed, the 22.8 million, with the 2015 changes we made, we changed the tier structure, we changed some of the fixed rates and how that's allocated. We included a livable, 400 cubic feet per month. For this last year and for this budget, 75% of our service charges are now fixed or base charges. So that means is unlike the last time we went into a significant drought in conservation, we probably lost $2 million in revenue. Here we would not. It'd be a sizable less amount to do that. And then the 25% remainder is volumetric or consumptive charge. When we look at capital outlays, the total is $27 million in this budget. Consistent with the type of service the district provides, the primary uses of expenditures in the district budget are personnel related, meaning salaries and benefits, materials, and services. And I should have said earlier too, you know me, I'm just gonna go right through my slides. I don't have a whole lot of them. If you absolutely wanna stop me, you can try. But otherwise, we'll get to the end. We'll get to the end and I'll open it up for questions. Labor, this year's budget, labor is 48%. Capital, we mentioned, is 7 million or 26%. Non-labor is 26%. This pie chart probably changes quite a bit. If you look at last year, we had 13 million for CIP. We've invested heavily. That rate study was built on the factor that we would be heavily investing. So that's going to change from year to year. And I also want to point out for those who may or may not know that if we do move into a conservation type mode, I mentioned the fixed fees and that, but conservation normally for us has a very nominal effect on expenses. If anything, the last time we had it, it increased our expenses. We have notices, we have public hearings, we have signage, we have ditch tenders, watching the ditches like a hawk, and all these other things. So even moving into this, I think this is a realistic budget for both revenues and expenses. A couple more slides, bear with me. Labor obviously is our biggest expense. Total labor-related budget expenditures are $12.9 million. The labor budget is prepared by analyzing each employee and forecasting all related factors, including overtime, step increases, workers' comps, and insurance rates. For fiscal year 23, the district is proposing one additional FTE. And that FTE, I believe, is a utility worker that's being split half between raw and reclamation, I think, in there. And that's it. I do think this is an interesting slide for everybody, both internally and externally in there, is that out of the 12.9 million, 58% would be considered the actual gross wages. The insurance portion is 15%. PERS is our retirement system, 15%. And then retiree health, or you'll hear it in the next slide, OPEB is 8%, and then employer taxes is 4%. So that's kind of where those dollars go. Oh, yeah. Eric stopped me, so I see Lisa. Lisa, go ahead.
Just question on that, on the insurance, is that insuring our facilities, insuring our workforce? What is the insurance?
This insurance on this slide is solely related to the wages, health insurance, workers' comp.
Very good, thank you.
Yep, good question.
I have a quick question, Steve.
Sure.
I know you said wait till the end.
No, that's all right.
I'll forget it. Okay, for the PERS and the retiree health, where is it of the actual retirement of, when we see it on our claim summary?
Right.
That's not just health, right? That's their actual retirement for the retiree. So PERS, is that referring to everybody?
So, PERS is the actual public employee retirement system that we're a member of. So as you're an active employee, you make your contributions, the employer matches those contributions, and it goes into the system. Then when you retire, like Director Boatwright up here, you are being paid by the PERS system. So the actual payments out from the retirement system are based on what we're continuing, both the existing employees and that. So when we look at our retirement costs, those are basically for the employer's share to go to him, but the actual payments to the retirees are coming directly out of the PERS retirement system and are not included in our financials.
Okay, good. So this reflects what we are as the employer are paying in.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Correct. Good question. So along those lines, every year we hear about the rising cost of retirement. For us, it's also the rising cost of OPEB, other post-employment benefits. Think retiree health. For us, that's what it is. Some agencies could have some other ones, but you hear all the time, PERS doing this, doing that. Stock market's up, stock market's down, contributions aren't enough, contributions are more. PERS essentially does a 2-year look back and they do an annual actuarial valuation where they're trying to come up with what are the projected costs. And they frequently change the accounting rules. So it's a moving target, almost year to year, but definitely every 2 years. But we always track it at least 3 years out. And they're required to provide this every year. It does lag a couple of years. Then the middle column in there is the OPEB. That's driven by employee mortality, insurance rates for health insurance, family versus single, deductible. I mean, it goes on and on and on. And between those two of those, that's where the real dramatic increases occurred over the past 30 years for us especially. But we do have numbers for fiscal year 23. And so I've highlighted in the middle there. At the top is just the projected amounts in total for TUD. The next one in there, so for fiscal year 23, PERS is going to jump up 12%. OPEB is actually going to go down 23%, and so the total is 3%. But this is important because we've had wide swings between 0 and maybe 20 or 30% in here, and everybody says, PERS is failing, you better be setting aside money and everything else. Well, this is how we watch it and do it. And then down at the very bottom is really, what does that mean to the total budget, the total dollar change? So for 23, it nets out to a negative 96. 24, we're going to jump up 143, 25, 122. I guarantee you those last two numbers will change by next year when I get there because they're always being updated. But these increases and decreases are based on the accounting rules, unfunded accrued liability. OPEB has a thing called actuarial determined contribution, but it's an amortized amount based on these actuaries. I call it voodoo accounting just because it kind of is. But you got to have it. So then what about the other stuff, the non-labor? Non-labor expenses in this budget, as we saw in the pie chart, are $7 million. Our budget process, I mentioned before how each of the departments has their own budget template. And they're going through, there's about 40 to 50 individual categories from fuel to small tools to supplies, repairs, and they go through all of that. And I, in addition to that, have a 10-year look back because a lot of our stuff is kind of historical. We use about the same amount of base rock and about the same amount of fuel and that. Now this year with the fuel prices, I remember complaining all the time back in 2008, I was paying $4 a gallon for gas and how outrageous that was. And now my daughter, she's in San Francisco, she's paying $8 today a gallon. And the toll went up to go across the bridge. So who knows? But we analyze those. We get input, like I said, from the managers, the superintendents. We go to outside agencies such as TPPA for power costs, Aqua JPIA, Abby's helped us on that. And where we think it's appropriate, we put in an inflation factor. Tough thing to do this year. The Caltrans report we used, they said it was about 3.6. Well, the last 3 months, it's been over 8%. So, where appropriate, we've done that. And the financial statements I bring you historically break it down into 5 categories: chemicals and supplies, services, repairs, utilities, and general and administrative. So a while back we did it, kind of the top 10 list. What do you think it would be? Normally it doesn't change much. You look at the first 4, they're almost always there. Supplies, electricity, outside repairs, and chemicals. They're just always there. The next 2 categories can go up or down. Consultants, definitely depends on what we're doing. Information technology, Corey has driven us into the top 10. We've never been there before. But, Corey does an outstanding job. You're all well aware cybersecurity is a thing, and it's an issue. And we're addressing it. Corey's probably working on it every day in some form or fashion. And so the budget reflects that. we have to kind of prioritize how much can we do there, but that's why it's in the top 10. Tools and equipment, again, one of those, like Eric said, that's basically everything that's over $5,000, but not 50,000. So it could be turbidity meters, it could be a jackhammer, it could be all these different things, and they're very, identified down to the level, they coordinate with operations on that. Fuel, guess what? It jumped up this year, and I expect it to continue to go up. The earlier question about insurance, this is where our general insurance is. We switched carriers and went down, went up a little bit. Here we're back here, but I think this number is still below what we had in the budget last year as well. And then the last one on there that's curious, and I'm happy to see it, there is meters. They've made a dedicated effort to continue this automation process wherever we can. And we've gone from probably 40% to now pushing 60%. So, the cost of meters is in there, some of the ditch stuff we also have in there. But just taking those top 10, that's 61% of all non-labor, that $7 million we talked about.
Question, Steve.
Yeah.
Okay, the PSPS, when was the first one that we had to respond to? PG, the power.
I think it was right before COVID hit.
2018.
18, yeah.
And so-
fall of 18.
And we incurred expenses like we bought generators.
We rented generators for a long time.
Okay, I'm just looking at how the cost of just doing business is changing with supply lines now being unreliable. It makes sense that we build larger places to store the things that we had to buy because we needed to provide water, which includes generators, and they need to be stored somewhere. And then also when we have our mutual aid agreements, we need inventory to be able to help our neighbors and vice versa. So it pays to have our own inventory because things could be months or weeks. If we have a disaster, that's not good. So I see where we're shifting to larger warehouse, all that makes sense. My question is, we had I think a pretty hefty capital outlay for our first PSPS. Generators, and response.
I think nearly $300,000. Am I crazy? $180,000.
The money we got for the generators.
That year,
Yeah.
2018, the money we expended to PSPS, $180,000.
So, right, plus our overtime to make sure they didn't run out of gas, and set our response cost something. So, I know that hasn't really been reflected in a way, but, do we budget for that response minus the generators that we've already bought, but also including renting new generators?
Typically, what they're doing at the departmental level is we start with a 3-year look back. So in their template, they were provided the last 3 years for their department, these 50 different categories. So in there would have been the generator rentals, okay? Generators we purchased, we were able to get some grant money or whatever, but we start there. And then I encourage them, look at that, is that normal? Is it PSPS? Is it a drought because of that? And then do you know anything for next year? What do you do? So we've analyzed on a line-by-line basis and come up with this. So I can tell you right now, this one really doesn't have near as much with the PSPS as we experienced back in 18-19, but that's because a lot of these, we got the generators, we installed the generators, and now, yes, there will be time for them to go fuel them and start them and maintain them, but we're not renting them. We're not buying new ones. And even the time, that's important to note here that, we look at everybody's here the whole time. I don't know where construction is going to be. Is it a water break? Is it a sewer break? Whatever. But I'm going to include every one of those employees for being here 40 hours a week, and I'm going to look back at their overtime. Then when they go out there, is it a PS event? Is it doing construction? What's going on? Then that's how it goes. So we make sure we have enough in the budget.
Thank you.
That help?
Steve, before you take off, I was gonna wait till the end. One of the things I'm most proud of really is that supplies, 651,000. I don't know if that's varied much over the years. It must vary because of inflation and things of that nature. But what makes up those supplies is more and more new stuff. new pipes, as you can see, thousands and thousands of feet of pipes are in that supplies. Whereas previously, like before 2018 and before, there's a whole lot more Band-Aids and full circle clamps and baling wire. That was the MO then. Remember in 2000, I think it was 2018, two of our brand newest distribution workers went to a leak up in Crystal Falls, and it was a service level leak, and they were shocked. These are our two newest employees here. They were shocked what they saw, so they cut it out. They cut this piece of pipe out, poly tube, service level, put a new one in there, and brought the thing to me. That was a 6 or 8 foot piece of poly tube, 1-inch poly tube, and it had about 15 clamps on it. I laughed at first, but then I got really angry, right? Who in their right, and some of those had to be moved in order to get a new clamp on it. Who in their right mind thought that was okay? Anyway, I'm really proud that up there, that mantra, that attitude is gone, and we're putting in new pipe. We're not gonna make another trip next week. Sorry.
And also, you know, Barbara, you mentioned inventory. You know, that's an important concept for us because we're 24/7 operation. And so when are we going down to Lowe's and picking up something? When do we want to have it on hand? When can we get it on discount or whatever? And our purchasing agent does a real great job of looking at that. And over the past couple of years, he's completely redone the inventory system to identify things that we're using recurring. You know, he gets a bid on every single item we keep in there. Right now, we have over 1,000 items in our inventory. You know, if you walked out there and seen, some of them we may not use once 10 years, but you gotta have them because they don't make that clay valve anymore or whatever else. But a lot of the items are stuff the guys use on a regular basis, and so we gotta have that there. Unfortunately, the more CIP we do, the less space we have out there, and the busier he becomes in the warehouse worker. He brought this to my attention probably 5 or 6 years ago. And typically what happens is the engineers or the construction guys will give him a parts list. He pulls everything, sets it on a pallet. Oh, they got a mainline break. They go do something else. Well, if you walk out there, there's multiple pallets that he set up that's ready to go. And then he's stacking stuff outside, which he doesn't like to do and stuff. So, you know, that improvement has been talked about for several years now, and I think it benefits everyone, both the customers and us as well. So, and the inventory doesn't, you know, when they pull inventory, it gets charged, whether it's a repair or replacement or going to a new item. So these supplies just aren't all our inventory, you know, willy-nilly, but that's what's in there. So what's the summary? What's the recap? Where do we stand? We take the in water, we take 17 million. We take the 9 million labor. We have services of 4.5 million. This is where that debt service is. So in the case of water, that's both principal and interest. In the sewer fund, we have what's called a interim construction loan that we got. And so we will begin drawing down on that. Until we finish the project, we pay interest on that amount. Then once we finish the project, USDA will pay it off. And then we will begin a 40-year payment schedule with USDA. So we budgeted the actual interest cost for the sewer fund. That's our total outflows. So it leaves a net of $3 million in water and $1 million in sewer. Okay, so we could turn around and say, Eric, that's all you get, no more. But, you know, my concern is, again, I said earlier, if we push you back to the next year, it's gonna cost more. Is it gonna be something like Sonora Water Treatment Plant where it's gonna fail and we're gonna have thousands of customers who don't have safe water? So we have to have some level of it. Yes, the rate study in 2015 dramatically turned the ship around, dramatically gave us money for all of those things, not just CIP, but the other things as well. So I think we have to go forward. I mean, Eric's always saying, well, CIP is the first one to get cut. And that's kind of the issue here. We have a net on the bottom line of 2.2 million and on sewer fund 685. In the past, we always had reserves for sewer, so I never kind of worried about that too much. But guess what? We needed to commit those reserves to the regional treatment plant to get the USDA financing. So, you know, we're kind of in a similar position as last year in that if you recall, the fiscal year 22 budget we adopted a budget with $2 million deficit. Now, you might say, well, wait a minute, that's not a balanced budget. Why are you adopting a deficit? I don't like adopting a deficit, but the reality is, typically, we're not gonna do our CIP 100%. I mean, because of grant opportunities, because of delays in permitting, because of weather, whatever it might be. And so for this year, we did not require to go out and get outside financing. We were able to stay, even though we projected 2 million, we were able to stay on that. The other option would just say, well, let's just cut the budget. How are we gonna cut the budget by 3 million? I just don't see a lot of excess in our operations. You all know how we do things. We look at every single charge. I mean, we could cut back and maybe save tens of thousands, but we're not gonna save the $3 million. And then are we gonna slash CIP, which I think in the long run will probably cost us more. Is it realistic to budget 13 million this year like we did last year? No, hopefully we get a great big grant and that'll be the case and it'll be different, but we really don't. But just to, we can come back to that slide, but just to kind of put it into perspective, what are some other alternatives? People say all the time, go get additional revenue. How do you do that? Well, we can do a rate increase, and that's what we're supposed to do if our operations cost this much and our CIP is this much. As we know, we've initiated a 218A process. So we're in the middle of that. We'll proceed accordingly. The other one we've looked at in the past is we do have some surplus real property. We're continuing to look at what that is, identify, determine the real potential surplus, and then what are the possibilities of selling it. But it's also, just like last year, we're still presently looking into adding additional property. So it may be more of a wash than a deficit reduction. Grants. I just want to say right now, grants for the last 5 years have ranged from $1.5 to $6 million per year. The total over the last 5 years is 12 million. Obviously, that doesn't include USDA yet. But again, there's 12 million there. Investment income, we've turned around, we've hired an investment manager. Looked at it a couple months ago, blue skies, everything's wonderful. We're all gonna be swimming in it. We actually included some additional revenue in here for that. Over the past several months, it hasn't really been the case. So we all know where that goes. Capacity charges, somebody brought that up earlier as well. In the last 5 years, our capacity has ranged from 300,000 to 1.2 million a year. Not a big number. Usually it's going to be something like Avalon or, the casino or the Law and Justice Center or whatever. But, we just don't have that kind of growth like you see in Pleasanton or Dublin or wherever else. I mean, if we get 20 to 40 new customers in a year, that's pretty big. But those monies have to go right back to the CIP in there. So don't budget those things. We don't include them here because we can't use them for operations. And then lastly, loans. And I know frequently people will say, well, just go borrow the money and do that. Well, the USD loan was a big deal. That's what got us to the point of being able to do the regional treatment plant and at a low rate and 40 years. Good stuff. Once you go outside of that, the problem is the water fund doesn't have the reserves. In sewer, we were able to do that because we had reserves. The water fund, if you're able to get a loan, the real question is what they call debt capacity. Do we have sufficient revenues over and above what we're spending to repay these loans? Water's tight. I mean, we're looking here, we're saying a deficit and doing that. So do we have the loan capacity? And then typically if somebody's gonna give it to you, they're gonna charge you for it. So it's gonna be significantly more of an expense. What other alternatives? We talked about labor in here. I talked about OPEB, and that's our retiree health insurance. I just have to point out to the board that the contribution requirements of the OPEB plan and what the members pay are established by and may be amended by the board of directors. This is based on board of directors made promises that retirees would be provided that, but on an earlier decision, the directors adopted an annual pre-funding contribution policy for a 10-year phase into full actuarial determined contribution. We started with 10% in 2015. This year's budget is now up to 90%. And the idea is that if you pay in this full amount each year, it will pay for itself eventually. We're still a few years away from that. But you know, the other thing that's important is we have what's called pay-go. So the percentage funding, the 90% we're putting in is about $224,000. The pay-go, meaning people that are already retired, that we're paying their health insurance, is $755,000. Now, what happens to these monies we put in is it goes into a trust that can only be spent on the retiree's health insurance. As of last month, it was about $10.5 million was in there. We do not take anything out of that to pay them because we want to be self-sustaining. But if you take that plus the actuarial liability, the net liability of our last audit was $8.5 million. So not a good idea to balance the budget taking money here because we still have that outstanding liability and it would change our ability to continue to meet our promises to our employees. So the final slide I have for you is what about anything else? You know, there's a discussion between sufficiency and potential reductions. You know, I'm uncomfortable with our current inflation situation. I'm uncomfortable not knowing what a vendor is going to charge me next month or when we can get the materials. I've tried to be very conservative here with the inflation factors, and I'm trying to be optimistic with the economy and doing that. But there's a happy medium in there, and it's just an unknown. You know, the budget's our best plan right now, and we'll watch it as we go forward and adjust it accordingly. But some key areas that's come up in the past is first and foremost consultants. This budget includes $431,000 for consultants. What's that? We have $165,000 for USBR. We have $80,000 for a new strategic plan. We have $70,000 for EN2. We have $50,000 for labor negotiations. And we have several that are $25,000 or left that total $66,000. A lot of the next one, legal, $321,000. A lot of this is related to the PG&E issue and the rate Prop 218. So that, I know it was a whole lot of me talking. So at this point, I'm happy to answer any questions I can.
Oh, go ahead, Jim.
That $50,000 for labor negotiations, is that an every year line item and it builds so that when the contract's up, or is that because the contract's coming up here pretty soon?
You know, I'm a firm believer in we've got to provide year by year. So just like Eric talked about, we may have some rollover CIP and that sort of thing. Typically, our labor contracts are for 3 years. And sometimes they bid for 2, I guess, on that. But you know, our labor contract right now is established and it's through the end of June 30th. And so then the next one will start in January of the next year, typically, when we'll start the next one for that. And that'll go into effect the next June 30th. So this one is here is having like kind of compared notes. We've had higher, we've had lower. This is our estimate, kind of what we think in there. That would be for the MOU, for the next MOU negotiation that will occur next year.
Okay, thank you.
Steve, could you clarify the starting times of the contract again?
The MOU?
Yeah.
The current MOU expires June 30th, 2023. So the January that Steve was referring to is when we typically start the process of negotiations, gathering data, and then, of course, meeting with the union.
It's perfect.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Along the same lines, in the past, we've hired negotiators to the tune of, you know, a lot of money. Carmen Plazade Jennings comes in mind a few years ago. Where does that fit? That was what, $240,000 or something for that negotiator?
Well, like I said, we look back over the last several ones, and it's been anywhere from maybe 30 up to 200, as you said, in the past, 4 or 5 negotiated items. So Abby and I kind of looked at it. We reached out to some of the people we use. We talked to the consortium and did that. And we feel this is we don't have a contract with anyone. This would be our expectation. And we think we can be within that.
Another question. That fine that we had to pay a while ago, where did that come out of? That was for the contaminant?
The consent decree for the wastewater stuff?
Yes.
But, I think the question is, was there a decide item to pay off the settlement for the consent?
CalSPA's been done for several years.
Correct, but did it come out of CIP? I mean, is CIP sort of the shock absorber for these unexpected expenses?
It kind of came out of everything.
Yeah, I don't know if everybody gets this, I'm just an old school accountant, but here's a dollar bill. Okay, it costs $27 million to run TUD. If I spend this dollar bill, did it come out of CIP? Did it come out of fuel? Did it come out of penalties, fines, wherever? So, when I come to the board, that's why I'm not a fan of changing the budget every board meeting and stuff. When I come to the board and I say, well, why is that higher? Well, we have CalSPA payment that was unexpected. Our plan right now does not include any fines or penalties. We do not expect any for this year. So, but in the past, when you get there, we get to the end of the year and it's like, we'll have some CIP that wasn't completed. We may have some where we spent more. But, and again, that's important to know. You approve the total budget as board members in that CIP. We're not going to come back to you on a line-by-line item as long as we're within the CIP. I turn around to Eric now and I say, Eric, this CIP is going over. Where do you want to take it out of? And he looks at all the other ones and says, this is delayed, so I'm going to take it out of there. Versus coming here and saying, hey, this sump needs an extra 5,000 board, I want you to do this. Now, on the other hand, if we have something radically new, we need an extra $1 million, we're going to come to the board and say, we'd like to amend the CIP budget to include an additional $1 million. That's just the practical, operational way of how we deal with an adopted budget and what goes on here. But to your point, Barbara, it would show up in your quarterly budget to actual and showing that, and that includes the amount we pay for CIP, that includes the amount we pay for operations.
My final question.
I love questions, even comment.
Procurement authority. That seemed to be confusing to me, and maybe this is resolved because, all right, we raised the procurement authority, which as I understand it, a general manager or high-level staff has already blanket authority to spend, $150,000 without coming to the board.
For the general manager.
The general manager, okay. That was increased from, I think, 5,000 before coming to the board. Is that your understanding?
Well, we redid the whole purchasing policy. I believe it was 2020, I think. And again, we compared to other agencies that did that. And so we established certain routine levels for superintendents, executive management, and the general manager. It hasn't been revised since then. As far as before that, I don't remember off the top of my head, but in this day and age, 5,000 just doesn't work.
So my question is, it is not a slush fund for the general manager. That's my question. It is within his authority. If there's a CIP thing, he can authorize that expenditure. It has to be in the budget to authorize. Go ahead.
Yeah, so it helps me with what I want to say. So Steve and Eric usually always say this may they happen. So this budget, once it's adopted, once you all go through it, both the capital and the O&M, it's a budget and it's a point in time. And what we know is literally the next day something could come up, a pipe blew up and like might have happened out in Mill Villa, by the way. Right after you said we haven't had one, we had one literally moments later. So that,
We gotta get you guys some wood up there.
yeah, so it's a point in time. So I may need to authorize a $75,000 outside construction on-call contractor and not necessarily come to the board. That's, I think, is.
I think that's the correct use of that.
Yes.
That authority. Thanks. Okay, any other questions from the board or
And-
comments?
Mr. Perkins, that level has been reduced from the 150 that was previous?
I think it's up to 150 now. That's been reduced. I use 75 as an example.
Okay, 75 without coming to the board and 150 once the board is.
Above 150, on a special use or something or other. Not if it's already identified in, an end budget or CIP. In other words,
So is it 150 or is it 75?
150, right? It's 150 for me.
Director Murphy did have her hand up for a comment.
Okay, go ahead, please.
Mine was clarifying the same thing, just to be clear that it's 150.
Yeah, and I'll just tag on from a practical matter, the way we look at it on a day-to-day basis, unless it was a dire emergency, which is a whole nother category of purchasing, I feel like we would bring it to the board anyway. Whether it's a staff report or whether it's in your discussions with the general manager, it's very rare. Normally, like I just listed the consultants we have, okay? So it's not like a consultant's gonna walk in and up the street today and Don's gonna approve a $200,000 contract, $150,000 contract. We always look at, is it budgeted? I mean, I hear that from every department, every employee, is it in the budget? It's in the budget. So we take that pretty seriously, so. But, again, we can revisit the purchasing policy on an as-needed basis. It's something that is a concern, but based on the actual events and expenditures, that's kind of how I see it.
President Balin, but going back to if an item is in, says $500,000 and it's in a CIP approved budget by this board, Mr. Perkins has the ability to just, immediately, okay, we got the contractor, we got the supplier, the equipment, the engineer that's gonna, whatever the item is, if it's adopted in our CIP, that puts it immediately forward in our, in Mr. Perkins' ability to execute that.
And I guess I would disagree with that in that when they go out to bid and get a thing, even though you've adopted the CIP for this, it comes to the board for approval. We don't approve CIP.
There's a bit, yes, there's a bit of a distinction. If it's constructed by TUD forces and it's just material and equipment purchases for our crews to then install it, there's really nothing for us to come to the board. It's like, oh, do you want to approve us to purchase 1,000 feet of pipe? That doesn't make a lot of sense. But if it is we put it out to bid, we solicited bids, we received 3 bids, we evaluated bids, we usually come to the board, we ask the board for authorization to have the general manager execute the construction agreement. And that's typically anything, usually anything we've kind of used above 150. And almost any capital project of any significance is going to be more than 150,000.
I have another example though, right, with Q-It, right? They can invoice us for well over $150,000 into the millions, right? And I don't go to the board, I approve it. So.
But it was previously approved agreement.
Yeah.
The construction agreement was approved by the board and it's in the CIP.
Yeah.
Well, it's definitely a complicated world now with cybersecurity and with PSPSs, et cetera. So I know labor is a large bulk of it. In the past, it seemed to me that labor was upwards of 70%. But Steve, you're saying that it's actually down to 48% now.
Right.
Are we down some employees?
No, I think it's a differential between how much we're spending in CIP. If you were to go back to that time, it was 70%. That could have been a 0 water CIP.
Right, that would have the labor.
Some of the costs have decreased in there as far as our payments into PERS and OPEB. I think our number of employees is pretty consistent, over the past year, so it just, that percentage total is gonna vary in there. And we've made real progress by our OPEB paying in that 10% each year. Because we paid 100% the first 2 years, then we went to 0, 0, 0, 0, and then we started 10, 20, 30. So as we make those payments, that's gonna reduce the total cost for that too.
Any member of the audience wish to chime in? Okay. Is there anyone out there?
Not at the moment, no.
Okay, great, thank you. Oh, yes.
So just to summarize real quickly, if you're not familiar, it's online, you can see it in there, but we have kept the budget report itself essentially consistent with last year. It's been updated, obviously, for the numbers, general manager's message. I believe it's about a 34-page detailed report. We have that drafted. We waited until this meeting to see if we had any feedback. The managers will have the final approval of that, and then that will be included in the board packet for the June 14th meeting. At that time, we would ask the board to approve and adopt it as it's presented. But if we need additional discussion or another meeting or whatever, that'd be the time to do it.
And we actually have a second regular board meeting on the 28th.
Correct.
After that, before, so there's some time here. Great.
We got a lot going on this month and month. Don's got his timetable out, so.
Well, thank you, Steve.
No, thank you for your.
Okay, good discussion. Well, okay, if there's no further discussion, then we will adjourn the meeting. Thank you all at